Okay, so Conor, thanks so much for joining myself and Daragh on the Clear Lens. It's a real privilege to have you.
Well, listen, that'll be
I
grand.
know it is. And as I was just saying, your book was transformative for me because, like what you just said before, now what mainstream media does is justify the economy, and what your book does is explain it. And that's what it felt like. It felt like it was being explained to me properly on a systemic
Oh,
level for the first time. And it felt like a breath of fresh air
thanks very much. I'm
and
blushing now.
also very enraging. I won't
Yeah,
lie, the rage was a big factor, but
yeah.
very motivational, very motivational.
Thank you very much.
And I think that probably the biggest reaction I had to the book was learning about graziers and their role in the Irish economy, particularly the famine. Their I suppose during the famine, particularly after the emergence of the graziers as a dominant kind of class in Ireland.
Mm.
Um, and, the cruelty and dehumanization of the Irish population having been cleared off their land during a genocide, more so than a famine, to be replaced by cattle. There's something really jarring about that. And the statistic that 2 million people were lost in the famine through starvation or emigration, and 2.5 million cattle replaced them.
Yeah,
And this class of grazier, the purpose was to feed Britain. And so Ireland, I suppose, was used for that purpose to graze cattle and then export them live. So no secondary industry developed here in Ireland around that, no spin-off industry. Really were serving the British economy. And that's serving, I suppose, a very small class of people while dispossessing the many. And so if we could kind of look at that and where they were by the time the Free State came into existence, and how that class of people didn't just persist, but actually were nurtured by the new Free State government.
yeah. I mean, like the famine just really is, it's a huge kind of pivotal kind of moment in like Irish history. We still don't have, I would argue, I think it's true, just maybe not going to quote me on this, but I think Ireland is the only state in Europe anyway that has a lower population now than it did in like 1845. There's nowhere else that
Maybe in the
that it's
world.
yeah, maybe so, that actually has
Mm.
a lower population now than in 1845, and that's on the island. Like it's 7 million on the island, and it was 8.5 million in like 1845. And that's down to that plan of just what Ireland should be. Like again, a part that for some reason it's like overlooked, but like Marx and Engels in like Capital kind of volume one have a whole chapter just on this, and Marx just says that that Britain is now forcing Ireland into what he sardonically calls its future. It,
Mm.
that is to be a kind of land for cattle and for sheep, and the key point here though was that like when we hear about kind of Irish history, and the land wars in 1880s and so forth, and you talk about the the battle against landlordism. There's a lot missed there because what these graziers were able to do in the 1860s. Actually, after 1850, 1855 is when they really start getting their hand on land because a lot of the landlords are now broke. So they have to sell off their land,
Mhm.
and some Catholics are buying that land, and then others are just kind of renting it for 100-year leases, 200-year leases, which they're then able to kind of subdivide. And so they're building up their kind of economic base here. So you have this kind of Catholic, if not land owning, land wealthy. It's true rental, but the rents are so long that it's kind of essentially theirs.
Mm.
And from the 1860s, 1870 onwards, this is an Irish Catholic ruling class in waiting. And what they also see is that their economic base, which has been shaped by this extractive kind of colonial system, that nevertheless their wealth is kind of predicated on that. So they cut their cloth kind of accordingly. So you see from the 1850s onwards, there's no more talk of an Irish kind of republic. It's an Irish home rule. So it's very
Mm,
much Ireland staying part in the empire,
hmm.
but can
To
happen
suit.
that. Yeah.
Mm,
And then after 1922, like that's the side which wins the kind of civil war, and the first kind of Free State, government says that the interests of the graziers, who were there's about 20,000 of them, um, that their interests are Ireland's interests, and Ireland's interests are 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 their interests. But the other one that's linked in that as well is the banking system. So Ireland stays part of the sterling area until 1979. So
crazy, crazy.
yeah, like I grew up in the 70s, and can I remember just going to the shops and buying sweets with kind of English coins because you could, and that's in Dublin. So like because it was the same money.
Yeah.
So you just use kind of English notes and English kind of coins here in Dublin, as you would kind of if it was Belfast or kind of London
And that was another
itself.
thing that really struck me about the stubbornness of the Irish government and to listen to the banks essentially who wanted it was
Yeah,
to not break that parity with the sterling and to essentially resist having our own control, full control over the economy in order to be able to provide things like credit for domestic industry.
yeah,
So it's really just this it's the using the Irish economy to serve the interests of the British economy. So it suited a certain strata of Irish society to do that. Is that a fair kind of
it
assessment of
is,
that?
it is, and like this is where I kind of fall back on my Marxist kind of background, but it's not going to be to everyone's tastes,
Mm,
but like what's interesting here is that this isn't just a choice or a kind of policy which they have kind of taken on. It's tied into the very relations of production in the state itself. So it's hot wired into the very kind of class relations in the
yeah.
state itself. It's now structural. And because it's structural, it needed a structural dynamic to break with that. And that wasn't done. So like it's not just that it's this kind of class who are making kind of policy, it's tied into the banking system, it's tied into kind of agriculture, it's tied into the traders, it's tied into exporters.
Mm,
And the banks are just very, very there's eight banks, there's eight kind of private banks in the south, and they're they're basically setting kind of monetary policy with the Bank of England until the 1960s at least, and so like in recent years there's been some kind of mealy mouth ag acknowledgement from mainstream economic historians that maybe this link wasn't the best idea for so long, and but like it ties into the myth of the T.K. Whitaker, kind of change in the 1950s. That wasn't Ireland was never protectionist. Never.
mm,
That's a myth. That is a self-serving myth. Ireland had one of the most open economies in the world in the 1950s. It was just open with one country only, and that was Britain.
yeah.
That was the structural issue. Like there was
Mm,
like I read about this in the book, but there was um there was a U.S. consultancy firm who were brought in by Sean Lemass in 1951 called
mhm.
IBEC, just the
That's
same
right.
name,
Yeah, I was going to mention this report. Yeah.
and they were just like they can actually hear the jaws dropping in the
Yeah.
report, going, "What the
What are
fuck
you
is?
doing?
What are you playing at here? This is not what are you doing here, you know?"
Do you not want to have an economy? Do you
Yeah,
not want to have domestic industry?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I took a note on that. They basically couldn't understand the continuous export of livestock and no processing here to expand the industry.
yeah.
And even, yeah, they couldn't understand that. It made no sense.
Yeah, yeah,
And
because
how
like, you
do we
know,
make sense of it? How
well,
when we have these experts who are coming in and, like you say, jaw dropping, they're making a plan, they're explaining what's wrong, and you've got these politicians, leaders saying, no, thank you.
well, I
We'll
mean,
go as we are.
like that's one of the like like that's one of the benefits of going into the archives themselves, because you see from the 1930s onwards, this is a live debate in Irish society. There are two banking kind of reports. There's one in 1927, but then there's the main one in 1935, 36 or so, that basically says, in its minority report, this is nuts,
Mm,
because we can't have credit here. There's no credit is too kind of expensive. Um, this, if we look back to the kind of austerity measures that were partly imposed, partly kind of embraced by Ireland post 2011. They were done to keep the link with the euro. So Ireland had to effectively engage in kind of austerity to keep its link with the euro. You can see, I am kind of simplifying, but you can see
mm,
somewhat a similar process with Ireland from the 1930s until the 1960s. So anytime there's talk of expansion or actually kind of changing from Britain, that takes credit, that takes kind of investment, and the banks are saying we can't do that because that would be inflationary, and if it's inflationary, we would have to break the link with sterling. So, and
mhm.
like Sean Lemass knew about this because he was making speeches about, I'm going to put banners on the banks. And of course, he never did. It's just kind of politicians speaking. So, so the third way then was the import exporters. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
it's yes.
there's another kind of there's another kind of element there. It's the post-war change. Sterling itself, part of the price that Britain had to pay for US help during the Second World War was to give up the world currency, sterling, as a world kind of currency.
Hmm.
The US said, no, we want that now. So Ireland couldn't use kind of sterling in the same kind of way anymore. I got more into it in the book on money.
Hmm.
But but you can see here that this is not like the structural barrier, the the kind of structural kind of barriers and the class kind of dynamics that kind of support them are not lost on the Irish people. It's obvious to them.
Yeah.
But there's no but it's so kind of structured in the state itself that it can't it's hard to kind of
It can be hidden. It can
yeah,
be hidden. This, and it's
yeah,
not like we're being educated or treated to any kind of, analysis or explanation in the mainstream. So there's a lot of gaslighting that happens. And I think people could probably
yeah.
relate to that feeling of
Mm,
knowing something is wrong, but being kind of told, having reality turned in its head, and having to kind of fight that. And that's what the power, I think, of work like yours is, because it gives all of that power back. Um, it's when you're talking about how we imported exports, so with that stubborn refusal to have fiscal independence, and to make the leap to develop our own indigenous industry, we decided really to industrialize via foreign direct investment. And it gave rise, I thought this was interesting when you said it gave rise to a particular type of Irish capitalist entrepreneur. There's money to be made in serving these foreign investors, basically. So
mm.
they're waiting on arrival
Yeah,
for these, and industries built up around them, like construction, banking, property, haulage, legal services. So the Irish economy, the domestic strand of the Irish economy, evolved around servicing these imported exporters, as you call them.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. So it's kind of managers, so it's a managerial class. It's not a kind of entrepreneurial class.
Right.
Um, but like just to be kind of, just maybe be like a bit clear, because it's sometimes thrown back that Ireland couldn't break with the trade with Britain and it couldn't be fiscally kind of independent. Um,
Mm.
and like like how that is kind of twisted is that that's saying that was the argument for protectionism. It isn't. It's saying that we want free trade with Britain, but we want it on a non-colonial way.
Yeah.
What we have is trade is with Britain, but it's a colonial extractive trade.
Yes.
And the argument is that no, we need to get rid of the colonial extractive element and just go into having free trade. Just have trade as in we have goods, you have goods. But
Hmm.
to do that means breaking with that extractive colonial system, and they wouldn't do that.
Mm.
So that was the break because there was very powerful class and financial interests with that extractive colonial trade. And I have to kind of really kind of emphasize that because like it gets kind of lost. It's thinking that Ireland had free trade with Britain as if we're equal partners. And it's going,
Yeah.
no, 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 no,
This was an
no.
economy that was extracting from Ireland and the Irish people, but because it was benefiting those closest to the decision making and power, it didn't change.
More or less, and power being not just in terms of politics, but power, like, even down to the fact that the like Irish state, even when it sets up a kind of central bank in 1944, it doesn't give a central bank powers until 1968. And the Bank of Ireland stayed the account holder for the Irish state until I think the 1970s or the 1980s. So
Mm.
so the Bank of Ireland was the current account for the state. So we had the hundreds of millions on its kind of books, which it was then able then to use for its own kind of credit for its own kind of credit its credit formations. The reason you have a central bank is that it holds all the state's money, which you then use and
Yeah.
kind of leverage that. So um, it's not just keeping open trade, with Britain. It's keeping a deeply unequal extractive kind of colonial trade that was formed going back to the 1600s and really in its current phase, post kind of famine.
Yeah.
That's what
So,
needed to change, and
yeah.
and that was not lost on people, but it was just being blockaded time and time and time again.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And something just on
Sorry,
that
Daragh. Yeah.
that I found very enlightening in the radical political economy course that you gave was even this map of Ireland that you showed in terms of even the size of the farms and kind of what they were used for in this process really of wealth transfer. And something I never realized actually was that the cattle were exported live rather than as beef or processed. So I'm wondering, in terms of, say, these wealth transfers, even from, say, Ireland to Britain, what would have been the primary mechanisms that this wealth was actually transferred? Like, how does that actually work? Because I heard you also talk about, say, world systems theory before in the classes. So I'm wondering if you could maybe just explain briefly kind of how these wealth transfers actually happen.
Well, I mean, in terms of banking, how they would do it is that they would buy kind of Bank of England bonds. So so what you do is that you invest the people's kind of deposits in Bank of England bonds, which are low, which are quite stable, but the low interest bonds. So they would earn maybe 2.5% from them. But then they would charge loans here at kind of 3.5%. So then they're making money on it. So how the savings get transferred over. I did use that word, but like it's not like they're not like during the kind of Iraq War where we saw those kind of pallets of dollars that are just like wrapped and then just flown into kind of Iraq. It was done through buying kind of Bank of England or state bonds. You would buy kind of British government bonds, and that was a way then of kind of keeping that link down with Britain. So that's one of the ways that it was done. Um, Another way, is actually through that trade then itself. So you have the value in the cattle, and like uh, same as kind of Audrey. Like, I mean, I'm always like, I mean, I might even go vegan because once you start getting,
Yeah.
once you start kind of delving
Emotion.
into this, you just go wherever. Jesus Christ! I mean, just even how milk is kind of produced, you go, fuck me. But like, but like, if you kind of park all of that, the entire kind of value is happening in England. Like, one example that I do use, and I use this yeah, on the classes as well, is that one of the things which De Valera did in the 1930s was that he put up some tariffs, as the rest of the world did, because he was a working recession. But one of them was on shoes and trying to build up an indigenous shoe industry in Ireland. All these kind of protectionist measures were were all for non-export businesses, which shows again that they did not want to upset Britain. But even with that, there was a small kind of shoe industry here. But in the 1940s, it's under pressure because it's getting its leather from England, and the war is on, and Britain's using all its leather for the war effort, for boots and so forth. So we're sending live cattle over to Britain, and then they're selling us leather. It's a classic kind of colonial kind of setup, you know. And I keep on going on about kind of like grazing, because that was Ireland's prime export. Like
Mm.
in the 1920s, like 80% of the value of like exports was purely in kind of live cattle. So and like all the value is going there as well. The argument's been made in the 1920s was that, well, if we keep these graziers rich, that money will then
Trickle.
it will kind of trickle down. But they're buying, but they're spending their wealth on imported goods, because all the stuff that they want is not made here. So they're
Yeah.
spending it on
Yeah.
imports anyway. But like, there are two ways, there are two kind of broad ways of seeing this. You know, one is that it's a bad policy, which it was, and it should have done. Or, as how I tried to kind of put it forward in the book, is that this policy is actually, it's the exhaust fume for an engine that we cannot see. And that engine is that kind of deep colonial class relations that have very, very deep roots here.
They have very deep
Um,
roots here.
you
And
know, yeah.
one thing that struck me as well, Connor, is that they knew what they were doing. They knew
Yes.
what they were doing. And I think that that's probably most evident when I was reading the chapter about both the Texan Oil Company and the Canadian mining company. And
Mm.
when Sean Lemass, the Texan Oil Company, when they wanted to get the lease and he sold them for 500 um, dollars or pounds, or should I say,
Yeah.
he had a problem with their name. He didn't want it to be the Texas. He wanted, could you just pop a shamrock on that there, please? Could you put Ireland on it? And that way the people won't know they're being robbed. And
Yeah.
like that, to me, like that's it. Like that, like if you told me nothing else and just that, the way that he knew that he was
Yeah.
selling out his own people, giving our resources for free, tax free, the tax incentive. Like they had been the year before, they had been exploring, they knew what they were doing. Then they were still getting tax credits to for the purposes of setting up new businesses. I'm kind of merging Charlie Haughey's one as well with the mining company in here, but they did begin with a generous tax incentives
Yeah.
and then didn't pay any tax. So they came, they robbed,
Yeah.
they left.
That's
And that's
I'm
it.
going to steal that phrase. That's a brilliant one.
But that's what it is. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's what is so infuriating. And you just got the Irish public who are kind of at the mercy of the lie that this is good, that they're going to teach us, they're going to show us. We haven't a clue about mining. We haven't a clue about how to drill oil. We need these experts in here to show us fools, do you know, and they'll
Yeah.
give us a job for it in return. And sure, won't we be so lucky?
Yeah. And, at the same time, if it can maybe be like, in fairness, like to the kind of Irish people, is that Ireland was, still is, in like in some ways, it was a coercive like society. I mean,
Yeah,
if you look at the Magdalen kind of laundries, at the industrial schools, these were ways of dampening down working class kind of resistance. That's what they were
yeah,
for. You know what I mean? Like, like it was the working. It was. There are some examples of kind of middle class families who may have kind of ended up there, but it was mainly a way of like putting manners on the working class, same as kind of migration. So that was a
Yeah.
case of just kind of so like even when you did kind of kind of point things out, they would jump on you. It gets into the church, like we kind of, even I kind of fall into this where you kind of, even though like again kind of being brought up in the 70s or so, like it's starting to fade from my memories just how oppressive the church was in Ireland and its role in
Mm,
there. And the church is a business. The Catholic Church
yeah.
is a business. It's a, it's like the old kind of joke about the Queen, which the Guardian have, where she would always talk about the family as the firm. So it's saying that, just the royal family is the firm
It's
because
the
it's a
firm.
business.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
church is a business. They would invest in housing in the 1880s, 1890s, in so-called social housing, as can we call it now. But he did it for a 3.5% kind of return. So he did it for profit, and when he didn't make it, they're investing somewhere else. So these are
Mm,
profit-making, kind of agencies that are using de facto kind of slave labor to make kind of products. Like so, like you had this very oppressive, very kind of coercive kind of society where dissidence was stamped upon.
yeah.
I don't go into it in the book, but like the drugs out a movement in or pushes out movement in the 1980s. I mean, the like Irish state had the choice of backing working class communities or backing pushers, and they backed pushers
Yeah.
because of those who were involved in the pushes out movement. There was a lot of kind of Republican, kind of elements that were
Hmm.
there. That shows you just what the state thinks of its own kind of people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really important that we begin to grasp that and the
Mm,
pattern of that treatment by the state and the
mm,
people throughout history, because it's over time when you see the pattern, you you see that it is the very nature of the state itself and the economy, to kind of
yeah,
use the whether you call it the worker base, to enrich this class of
yeah,
people who are ultimately exploiting them,
yeah,
and then to deny it, then to kind of do a double assault and deny it then.
yeah.
And um, that's the part that I think in Irish discourse, particularly, we all need to kind of get bolder at. And I suppose it's not like we're invited onto these panels or, into the columns of these papers
No,
where we could write or discuss that. But I think for
you can
people,
ask maybe, yeah. It's like,
yeah,
sorry, I mean, like I'm very conscious that, like, I mean, I've been kind of ranting on just the last kind of half hour or so, and sure, Dara's here as well. Like, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. Dara,
kind
I
of
was
Dara's done
actually,
some work on this as well. So
yeah, I
sorry,
think Dara,
Dara,
do you
I've
want to
been
take over? Because I think we've
hogging
kind of,
hogging all of this I have. So no, I
No,
mean,
Connor,
just
we're here to listen to you. And
will you
me and
stop?
Audrey, we have this this is maybe my sixth time on this podcast, so
yeah.
I'm happy
Oh
to
God.
listen today.
Oh,
So
stop. Okay.
and yet and actually like a lot of the podcasts that me and Audrey have done together, we've actually been quoting you and using a lot of your
Ah,
analysis. So I'm
Yeah.
very happy to listen
yeah.
today, but it just brought up kind of when you're kind of mentioning here just the discourse in Ireland and also kind of the general you could say misleading narrative that you do hear from a lot of the mainstream economists. In your course, you kind of refer to them as just the lads.
David
So
McWilliams and
we don't have to name any names
okay,
now.
okay.
Go on to but these people who you would see maybe as columnists in the Irish Times or the Irish Independent and kind of the go-to sources on the Irish economy. And it's funny because they can never really predict anything or explain anything that actually makes sense in how the actual economy works today. But there is a role that they do play in the general discourse and how people I guess, do get led astray in trying to make sense of everything. So I would be curious to kind of hear maybe just what you think about like how they keep the Irish population away from maybe the truth of the Irish
Mm.
economy. And then maybe if we could go into a little bit of like what actually is the structure of the Irish economy today, because again, it was something quite enlightening for me and Audrey to learn about, oh, well, this is actually the employment demographic in terms of who works in what. Here is actually the tax structure in terms of where the tax money comes from, and maybe more importantly, where it actually goes. You know, we're kind of taught,
Mm.
oh, all the tech companies are kind of running the country and we need them and blah, blah, blah. But when
Hmm.
you look into it, it's a very different story. So maybe if you could tell us first kind of what they say and kind of how they keep people away, maybe from the historical materialist perspective that you would represent. And then maybe we could go into a little bit of like what is the Irish economy today without the speculation and the sort of misleading narratives.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they just first of all, part of it is the format which they
Hmm.
use. So again, like, if your argument is purely that um, you know, that they're the stupid people in charge and they need to be schooled, and once they're schooled, things it will get better. Then you can do that in a 500 word on a column.
Mm.
But like if you're or a 30-second kind of sound bite on like 6-1 News. But if you're trying to say that, well, actually, this is actually a much deeper thing in terms of the structure, because in order to make that argument, you have to de-school people, or like unpick so much. It can't be
Mm.
done in a 500 or the 1,000 word kind of um, opinion piece or as a sound bite. And that's helpful for them.
Hmm.
So this is one of the things whereby like I like these type of things that are long form podcasts where you can actually go into this. Everything that I've said now, I couldn't do that in a tweet. It would just you can if you have a sh if there's no if you have an agreement on the structural dynamics and it's just about facts, then you can do these things. But but if you're saying that no, this problem is structural, it's economic class, it's not social class, it's an economic class relation, that takes time. It takes books
Mm.
and um,
Mm.
and that's part of it. And if I have a gripe with the kind of we kind of a progressive circles in Ireland or and kind of left wings is that there's a tendency to fall into that TikTok solution, you know.
Hmm.
Um, I know that people use kind of TikTok here,
Yeah.
but it's more that but that's the feed into this wider kind of long form. That's a different thing.
Mm. Mm.
Look,
Mm.
like you're using them to bring into the wider kind of long form
Yeah.
format. So that's a different thing from from just saying that why is nobody talking about this and that's all that they're talking about, you know.
Hmm.
So like
Yeah.
so you need also kind of those kind of workshops and classes. That's what I'm trying to do. Like even with the book, Since the Father, I was very very conscious that this book is as simple as it can make it. Its job is to get people into a wider world. It's a guide to a deeper kind of understanding. It's
It
not,
certainly is.
but it's only kind of stage one. So I know its
Mm.
role, and that it's really about kind of getting into a wider kind of a wider kind of a world there. But it takes 80,000 words
Mm.
to do that, you know, and so part of what's in their benefit is that it suits someone like like I have a joke on the classes about it's the Fin O'Toole bot. They can actually just write any kind of Fin O'Toole kind of article just with these kind of four stages, you know. There are powerful people who are in charge. No, there are powerful people who are pulling all the strings. Um, but but they're also idiots. So we need and you have no morals. So we need kind of people who are smart and have morals in charge. That is basically every single Finot kind of
Yeah.
article.
I
Right.
saw
However,
him
did you ever see it today or day yesterday? Sorry.
about Trump.
Yeah,
Yeah, I laughed out loud when I saw it. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
need,
it's every
we
like
just
it's
need a
just
better Trump, a nicer, yeah.
Yeah.
it's a it's a Trump with morals and we'd be fine, like
Yeah, if we could
no
just get the
argument
right
about
version of Trump.
so part of it is ourselves, and you're doing this where on the left and as progressives we give ourselves space to decode these things and actually kind of delve into
Mm.
them and not fall into the trap of just saying that, well, if I just put out kind of some kind of sassy tweet that'll change people's minds. It's impossible.
Mm.
I think
I
I
you
think he
think it's
called it,
good
was
to
it
use the
like you
tweet to
need
lure people.
it's a lot of people in, but you need to have that kind of long form
Yeah,
format
yeah.
for this. I mean, like we've been talking for about 25, kind of 40 minutes now. There's no RTE show that is structured in a way that maybe kind of Tommy Tiernan, which is kind of interesting.
Mm.
That would actually has that kind of wide-ranging flow thing. I actually saw him there with your man. It's a Niall from One Direction, is it?
Oh
I
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
Right now, I did not know who the guy was because, like, that
Uh,
is right. So I was there
where
going,
Connor Share?
I didn't know him at all, but I was engrossed by it because he did, like, actually did something that was very unusual. After the break, he went back to Niall. It was actually like he seems like a really kind of lovely guy. But it was a wonderful thing because he gave him the space to actually have that kind of
Mm.
conversation. There's very, very few spaces for that. So
Mhm.
in terms of the left, we also need to give ourselves these spaces, and in terms of workshops, in terms of writings, in terms of pods, where we can actually have this kind of space because we need it. If you're going to get into structure, you need it.
We do.
I don't see how you can get around that. Um, that's the Trump, pardon the pun, card, but that's the Trump card which the media have because it's all just clickbait now. And that
Yeah.
just suits
Mm.
them because it's all
Mm.
just, you can't get into the wider, deeper kind of narrative. It's like how we all know that the housing crisis is being caused by a government policy bringing in kind of, bringing in kind of vulture funds, but you'll have them saying that it's migrants,
Yeah.
because it's an easy, simple
And it kind of
message
just
out
like
there.
accepts the
Mm.
status quo as a given and as
That's
changes.
the yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, if you don't, how
Mm.
do you do that? So what
Yeah.
structures, what tools then do you need to actually try and interrogate this world, not just, kind of tweet it? How do you interrogate the like world? And you need
Mm.
space for that.
You
Yeah.
do need space, and you need to, like, I would ask the questions. The mainstream narrative now would have it that the Irish economy is one of the best in Europe. We've
Hmm.
full employment. I think Sharon Violan used the word one day, the economy has gone gangbusters when she was talking to Paul Murphy. She's like, why are you complaining? Do you know that kind of way? Like, it's just, that's what you're dealing with, those headlines. So why are you whinging? It's like, remember
Yeah,
Bertie Ahern's famous thing, how do these people not kill themselves? Do
exactly.
you know, it's like, that's,
The Irish, the figures for the Irish economy are the greatest work of Irish fiction since Ulysses. Right? They are complete. And even though like it borders on the kind of it borders on a slur, but Paul Krugman's tweet from 10 years ago, where he said that Ireland has a 26% a GDP growth, says this is leprechaun economics. And that was the phrase that he used for it. It went global, so much so that the CSO was so embarrassed that it now brings out another figure
and it
for
just,
it's an adjusted one that is not recognized anywhere else in the world. So like because it can't be so like in like Eurostat, which is the main kind of a database, all 26 members it's 26 now members of the EU have to have the same way of measuring things so that it can be kind of
mm,
compared.
yeah.
So Ireland's kind of GDP is still kind of measured in that way, which is just it's nuts. So like that's why I find it going back to kind of Dara's point. I focus in on jobs because jobs it's tactile. It's something that you can actually see. So, and then what's the exhaust fumes from those jobs is the PRSI tax take, because everyone has to pay everyone has to pay kind of PRSI. So when you look at those figures, you can see that the median wage, gross wage in Ireland is in the mid, it's around 36,000 a year. The figures which you hear in the media is for full-time industrial wage, which is like 60, 70,000. And you're there going, that's not people's kind of role. The largest single sector in the Irish economy is retail, which again kind of makes sense, you know. So like if you look at the sectors that actually keep Ireland going are the non-export ones, which tend to be retail, a public sector. So it's education, it's health, it's retail, it's services that are non-export. 85% of all jobs. This is not people now. This is jobs, and the difference being is that someone can have 2 or 3 jobs in a year. Like, you know, in the latest figures from revenue, there was 4.5 million jobs in Ireland last year. Some people may have been working 2 jobs, who knows? Or like, or
Right.
no, sorry. Well, you know, sorry. There are 4.5 million tax units. So like, we don't know whether someone worked for 3 months and then left, or, you know, like, you know, it's hard to know. But there's 4.5 million jobs, tax unit jobs, or,
Hmm.
4.5 million kind of tax units. And when you start kind of delving into those figures, you get a different view of how the kind of economy works. They tend to take out part-time work out of the figures for 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 jobs, for kind of wages in Ireland, which doesn't make any sense, because they they kind of justify that, saying that, oh well, it's only just part-time, it's people who aren't serious about working, it's just something which they're doing, it's a hobby almost in a way, like, or the
Wow.
students, you know. And they're going, well, no, like the largest
Carer.
kind, it's carers, and the large kind of you know, kind of,
Mothers.
it's mothers who have to, who can only work, who have to then work 10, 15, 20 hours a week. So there are these structural reasons as why we have a fairly high part-time job structure. There are structural reasons for that. It's down to our terrible childcare, or terrible kind of, you know, our terrible kind of healthcare reasons.
Mm.
They are dismissed in the normal kind of narrative, because it's all focused on how can we justify how the world works, not explain.
Yes, not
So
explain.
so so for me, I always go to the jobs first, and I like it. Like, it was interesting when the census kind of comes out, because it's the only census, it's the only kind of survey of everyone's. So you get a really good kind of sense of what the jobs out there. So it's retail, it's non-export. 85% of all jobs in Ireland are non-export. The largest,
85% is that's huge.
roughly, yeah, it's around, yeah, it's in the mid 80s anyway. This is from
Yeah.
the like, have to be wary is that, like, you know, like, this is from memory, so bear with
Yeah,
me
yeah,
here.
yeah. But in or
But
around. Yeah.
it's in around, it's in the
Mm.
mid 80s anyway. And so of the 15% of the jobs that are in kind of export businesses, around half of them are in the so-called FDI kind of job sector, and then half are in kind of agriculture. So it's interesting that even though the value of Irish, you know, agricultural exports, I think, is around 10, 15% of the value of all physical exports.
Hmm.
So you have these physical kind of exports at 10%, or thereabouts. Of them are kind of agricultural goods, and then kind of 90% of them are not agricultural, mainly in the FDI kind of sector, mainly in kind of pharmaceuticals.
Hmm.
However, in the jobs though, it's not a 90%, 10% kind of breakdown. It's a 50-50 kind of breakdown. So because those jobs in like agriculture
Hmm.
are more organic, again, kind of pardon the pun, are linked, have more kind of secondary jobs. They
Hmm.
actually lead to more kind of employment than in the so-called FDI kind of sector, which the figures now are a bit. I'm trying to get a decent on a kind of definitive answer on this, but it seems to me that the CSO has started to measure retail as FDI.
Mm.
So what it's doing is that it's taking FDI in its broadest sense, as in firms that are foreign owned, which includes Aldi, Lidl, Tesco, Marks and Spencers.
Hmm.
So I don't know when we hear these figures for the so-called there are 250,000 people working or 300,000 people working in like FDI, they're going, well, does that include Tesco?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think it may do so. Now, the point here is that I don't think that's people's idea as to what an FDI is. So if they're bringing in kind of retail, it's probably because the actual job numbers aren't really that great, you know. I
Yeah,
mean,
kind of.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like, it's a like it is, it's an important element of the Irish kind of economy. But so is retail, so is
Mm,
construction.
mm. But it isn't a pillar, like we're told. It isn't the key pillar.
I think that needs to be that the job is on them to show that. They keep
Mm,
on talking about corporation tax and kind of how huge it is. That is true at the moment, but that's only been since around 2017, 2018. Um, this policy has been in place since the 1940s. So how come it's only working just in the last kind of 10 years?
Mhm.
You
mm.
know what I mean? Like, so and even kind of finance in fairness to them, and that's one of a few times I would kind of say this, but
Mm.
they do say do not take Ireland's corporation tax figures now, which are not making kind of any sense as a structural form going forward. Even they say there's something kind of going on here. This is like two or three firms, right? So
Yeah.
that's why they say they don't bring it like Ireland. Like there was a headline there yesterday that Ireland spent more than it raised in like taxation. This is the idea of it, and um,
Mm.
and I'm there going, well, I hope so, because I mean that's what states should do. But like also that was also because revenue put a couple of billion into the rainy day fund.
Hmm.
Because what they say is that we can't if we can't rely long term on these corporation tax rates because they're not structural. They're just it's accountancy that is going
Hmm.
on here. So what I see and what I argue is that where you see a lot of the noise around kind of FDI is really in the financial sector, which is not that big of which is high assets, but it's low kind of employment.
Mhm.
Mm.
And it's mainly in those who are handling paper, which is law firms, accountancy firms. Like if you go down to the IFSC, just the largest kind of blocks are for
Yeah.
the it's for kind of accountancy firms.
Mm.
Um, so having said that, like at the moment, I'm actually writing up. This is actually I have it here. This is I'm writing up my notes on the Apple kind of tax case.
Yes. They beg
But
not to collect tax.
yeah, but Apple is a very interesting one because Apple does employ, 1,000. I would question if it is kind of 3,000, but they say kind of 3,000 in Cork. They do employ people. Dell employs people,
Hmm.
but in terms of the overall structure of the Irish economy, I think they still have to make a case that this is that somehow those jobs are paying for all of us, which is what they say. It's going no, like when you look at the job structure in
How could they
Ireland,
be? Mm.
it's actually fairly similar to job structures in other kind of in other kind
Mhm.
of modern kind of
Mm.
European states. What's unusual since kind of 2018, since the Apple kind of tax case actually, is the corporation tax kind of returns. But that's only been for the last kind of 7 or 8 years, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
Just on that corporation tax, and because you'd also mentioned the PRSI, and something I found kind of interesting in the book too was that you mentioned kind of PRSI as a key mechanism for the Irish government to raise funds to build the infrastructure necessary for foreign corporations here. And I think I actually asked you during the radical political economy course that about corporate tax in Ireland, and you gave me a statistic that really stuck with me about the median tax
Oh
rate
yeah,
paid
yeah,
by a corporation. And like, it does shift the narrative. Like maybe I'll let you do the reveal of what the median rate a corporation
yeah. So
is.
the so the median is the kind of 50% rate. So that's the rate that whereby half pay more than this, half pay less than this. And the
Hmm.
median rate of companies paying kind of corporation tax in Ireland, the median rate for them is zero. So around
That's
Shocking.
what,
like
like,
around kind of in any one year around 65 in the mid 60s anyway of all companies pay zero corporation tax. Like this is what was going through my head just watching all the protests from the haulers there kind of yesterday and
Mm.
today was that they're saying that they're paying so much on like so much of the diesel and petrol is in kind of taxes going, well, what do you expect from a low corporation tax rate state? I said, like, I mean,
yeah,
like the revenue raises like 2/3 of the tax take. It's in the 60s anyway, comes from two sources, which is pure SI and it's VAT. And
So the
VAT, yeah, exactly.
workers
So
essentially are
are funding and
what's subsidizing.
subsidizing
yeah.
these.
So we have horrendous kind of local rates. We have horrendous kind of rents. We have these enormous kind of taxes in terms of kind of VAT on like products. And haulers don't get it. They're going that, well, you're the ones who, when we talk about FDI, will say that the FDI is the be all and the end all. Like tax havens it's expensive to live in a tax haven. These are expensive places to
Yeah,
live in.
that's an
That
important point to
it's
make.
and that's what we are seeing here. So like the thing around kind of corporation tax is that 65 in the mid 60s pay zero because not that many Irish companies are that profitable that they would actually end up paying it anyway. They are living almost kind of hand to like mouth. So um this system of of like low kind of corporation tax or corporation tax avoidance does not benefit the vast majority of the businesses in Ireland who are crippled through three main things, which is insurance costs, rental costs, and then it's the VAT kind of costs. And like labor is part of that, but it's not the be all and the end all. Like the rental costs are what is driving kind of restaurants and the services industries out of business in like Dublin.
Mhm.
So like them having is like paying zero corporation tax means nothing to them because a corporation tax it's a tax on profit anyway,
Mm.
whereas VAT is a tax on income.
Yeah.
So or it's a tax that's put on, it's on top of your income or your charges. Um,
Hmm.
so So we have these structures whereby all the narrative is that what's keeping Ireland going is its low corporation tax system, when really that does not benefit 85% of the non-exporting kind of businesses in Ireland. It does benefit Glanbia, it does benefit Dairy Gold, it does benefit the big dairy kind of companies, who are among kind of Ireland's large kind of multinationals. They also are able to avail of the tax avoidance systems, same as Apple and same as the other ones.
Mm.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
you
an
know,
important point as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like Glanbia, I think in 2017, 2018, 2019, I think they were paying zero corporation tax each year. And they were making billions, in gross anyway. So I won't mention names because it's a podcast and it's going out. I don't want you getting sued, but like it is possible for personalities in Ireland, shall we say, to set themselves up as a company and then get charged as a company. And what that means then is that they don't pay PRSI, they don't pay, sorry, income tax on their income. They pay corporation tax on their income, which is
Mm.
lower.
Hmm.
So a way for personalities in Ireland to lower their tax take is to avail of those kind of tax avoidance kind of strategies that are used by Apple, that are used by Dell, that are used by Microsoft.
Hmm.
So you can start to see that there's a vested interest in terms of some of the personalities who are saying that how we must keep Ireland as a low corporation tax country, but they're going that it still costs money to run the state. So where's that money then coming from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They keep on talking about the bump from corporation tax, and that is true. It is there. But it's not feeding into services. It's not being used to build housing. That it's not using the like Apple money to set up a kind of social housing company that would then kind of build housing for that. I mean that like
Yeah.
because so
Well,
like
that's kind of the question a lot of
but
people have today is like, where does it go? You know,
Mm,
we're kind of
mm.
gaslit with these big GDP numbers and corporate tax revenue. And then you're at the same time hearing the government claim that they can't do what they did 50 years ago and just build social housing, or
yeah.
they can't provide public spaces and that everything's getting more expensive. So like, where does this money go?
Well, I mean, like there is a breakdown of that. I don't have
Mhm.
it here, so it's kind of possible. I mean, a lot of it does go on services. It goes on kind of education, it goes on health. But what you're doing is that you are using kind of taxpayers' money to subsidize a private for-profit system. So you get a
Mm.
Mhm.
lot of kind of tax breaks. You get a lot of grants that are there to subsidize profit-seeking kind of strategies of like private companies, rather than actually build kind of actual kind of social services. And so yeah, I mean, I'd probably be a bit vague on that because I don't have the stuff here,
Mm,
and only because it's going out. I don't want to say stuff that is not
mm.
Mhm.
fully kind of correct, but but it's fairly I mean, I can come on next week and give you a full kind of breakdown as to
Yeah,
how it's
yeah.
all spent, and even on and then kind of even on the budget, but like even on health, I mean, like the HSE is one of the largest purchasers of services in the state, as far as I know. So it's using kind of all this money, but it's using it to kind of subsidize private companies.
Mm.
Um, so who are able then to get kind of contracts with the HSC or with kind of someone else. So the state itself is the largest purchaser of goods and services in the state anyway, and
Mhm.
Mm.
so which I would kind of somewhat kind of agree with, because it does help to redistribute that.
Mhm.
Um, but the main kind of structural problems still lies in that it's not geared towards providing services. The state's role is to provide really scarcity, and
Yeah.
by making scarcity, by enforcing kind of scarcity, it then makes room for kind of private companies to fill the gap and kind of solve things. And we see
Yeah.
that
Mm.
in housing. I mean, like Dublin City Council, it used to build housing, now it builds scarcity. And its job is to create scarcity, and it does it quite well.
Yeah, I saw
Yeah.
statistics there saying that 2025, I think there were more evictions than during the worst years of the famine. There was
Yeah,
more
there was
than
20,000. Yeah, there was over
yeah.
20,000.
My
Yeah,
And
God.
at the same time, we're being told we have like the highest GDP per capita in
And full
history,
employment.
and we have this
yeah,
amazing economy.
yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
And
And inequality is growing. And it's because, yeah, the state's objectives are at odds with the basic needs of
it
yeah,
is.
people.
Yeah, yeah. And it gets into like where do you hear these, like when these stories can come out? It's only like the only time that working class kind of analysis comes out in kind of mainstream media or like in the state. It's via rage. So
Mm.
it's only when there's rage does like RTE and TV3 kind of show up and say, why are you angry? And then they've got five
Yeah.
seconds to like say why they're angry. I mean, if you ask me kind of why I'm angry, I would need about 40 minutes, you know,
Yeah.
and slides and a PowerPoint there on kind of O'Connell Street itself. It says, we actually have one here.
And a baseball bat.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that would
And
help. Yeah.
so then it shows up then in rage. So then they say, oh well, people then they're just angry and it's just violence. They're going, well, no, because that's the only mechanism you're giving them to express what is going on in their lives. All you're giving them
Mm.
is a rage kind of outlet. That's the only thing you will fucking cover.
Yeah. And it's because I suppose when you have reality denied for so long and for
Yeah.
so often as well, like you're left with nothing. You know, what are you left with as an option
Yeah.
to try and
Yeah.
express the injustice? You people
Yeah.
who don't want to
Yeah.
listen and actually want to tell you a different story that
Yeah.
no,
Yeah,
you know.
if there's one thing that I do find kind of very hopeful at the moment is that like this isn't, I wish it was down to my book, it's not at all, but like there's a much greater class consciousness now than there was when I wrote that book back in kind of 2011. And I can see it, and there's a whole kind of generation now, like in terms of Cato and so forth, that are a lot more kind of class aware and economic kind of class kind of analysis isn't just kind of social class than would have been the case even in kind of 2011. So you can see that there are positive changes happening. You know, people are starting just to kind of delve into these things about kind of structures and like so forth, like, you know. So yeah,
Yeah.
so like, you know, it's a huge difference. I mean, I may I may have mentioned this kind of Daragh in the classes, but I mean, I was doing these classes back in kind of 2011. So I see the difference even in people who are coming to them, and even their level of kind of class and consciousness walking into the room is so much higher now than it was kind of 15 years ago, you know. So yeah.
Yeah.
And so that is a reason for hope.
When me and Audrey were chatting about you coming on, and we knew that you were doing all this transcription of James Connolly's work. So one of the title ideas that was floated was the quote about governments just being committees of the rich. And I mean, it's I think never been so apparent that really nothing has changed. So one of the things we also wanted to ask about was all of this amazing work you're doing on James Connolly. And I guess, you know, for us, I know Audrey's reading Labour in Irish History at the moment. I found it
raging, just raging.
Yeah. But
I get
it's
through about 3
amazing.
pages and I go for a walk.
Yeah. But it's amazing how relevant so much of it is for today. I'm wondering if there's anything that's kind of stood out to you in particular from James Connolly's work that's really shed light on the general economic political situation today.
It is like it's down to his like in the book that's coming out this in the volume that's due out this year, that's is the complete shorter works. So in the intro to that, I talk about you know, like on these real kind of innovation in kind of analyzing, you know, our society, was that he identified just what the middle class in Ireland were in the British kind of imperialist system. And because that hasn't changed, it's so relevant even today. Just the other thing is that like where I am now is that I've started into his journalism, which is from 1898 onwards. So just when he got his own kind of newspaper. So what I love about it is just he's writing about Dublin, of course, but he's writing about Dublin at the same time as Joyce was writing, or was, you know, Seth's kind of Ulysses. So a lot of the same kind of characters that Joyce kind of puts in his book, Conley's writing about as well, and has his other kind of take on them. So so what I find, so I find him very alive, very he's almost in the room here, because, like, you know, he's talking about local kind of politics in Dublin, and it's I find it fucking hilarious, because like he's just he is like, I say this at kind of some of the talks, is that Connolly's works have been kind of bastardized, they've been truncated, they've been cut, and that you know, if your work has been edited by a dour, humorless trade unionist, then the Connolly who will come out of that is a dour, humorless
Mm.
trade unionist. But when you read his work as he wrote it, like he was a sarky fuck. Like it's so funny.
Yeah.
I like, and it's so biting. And like he's talking about that whole kind of like he's talking about that kind of what we now see as a kind of Fianna Fáil, kind of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael kind of class. He's also talking about just the sheer conservatism of the trade union movement, which again gets lost because,
Mm.
like, I mean, as one example of how non-radical Irish trade unionism is that it needs to go back to 1913 to find something to shout about.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, it talks about the Dunstars workers, but it doesn't say how ICTU opposed them.
Yeah.
It doesn't say about how how the trade union movement tried to shut them down.
Yeah.
Now they embrace them and they put them on the stands. But
Yeah.
like, but like, if it's anything, is that how I see it is that like how I see kind of history. You can see history in terms of stories and as lessons to be learned, and that's certainly I like reading that history as well. But like how I use history is in that kind of Marxist way, which is that history is the only canvas that is deep enough and wide enough to allow you to see class in motion.
Mm.
Mm.
And like, it's similar, as I say during the classes. It's similar to how climate studies works.
Mm.
So, what kind of climate studies does is that it studies the weather and the climate over time in order to see not change, but to see it in motion. How do you see climate in motion? But you need 30, 50, 100 years in order
Yeah.
then to see climate in motion. And by looking at its motion, then you can see how it's changed. But it's not
Yeah.
change that you're looking for, it's the motion. And Marxism uses history in a similar way, but it's for kind of class relations. Because of that, I see Connolly as, he's our man in the 1900s and he's kind of phoned us. It's a bit like Bruce Willis in like 12 Monkeys, if you ever seen that film. He's sent back in time and his job is to leave voicemail kind of notes to the future because that's how he can then kind of talk to the future. They can't talk to him, but he can talk to the future by leaving kind of
Mm.
voicemail.
Mm.
So Connie's like that. He's leaving voicemails for us saying, I don't know whether anyone can hear me, but this is what I see here. And then
Mm.
we're
Yeah.
able here in like 2026 to take what Conley's seen and then put that into a wider canvas to see class in motion. And by
Yeah.
doing that, we can start to see this kind of comprador class. So he's our
Mm.
man in the 1900s, phoning it in, telling us, I don't know whether anyone's listening, but this is what I see. This is what I
Yeah.
Yeah.
see here. And he's on the ground. So I find him extremely kind of useful for that reason. It's the reason why, like, I'm hoping to see, like, it'll be about 10 volumes, 12
Yeah.
volumes
Mm.
at the end.
Yeah.
So well, three finished. So like one quarter of the way there. Like it isn't bad.
Amazing. Yeah, I remember even reading, this is again maybe from the 1800s at some point, late 1800s, and he talks about the unholy trinity in Ireland of powerful interests. And he mentions the usury, like financial interests, the landlords, and then the sort of urban capitalists. And not that much has changed really.
It's not really, So again, like like he's able to give us that kind of cogent class analysis in the 1900s. We can then look at the work of Pater O'Donnell, who there's a link with yourself there, isn't it, Daragh?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. He was one of the
There's
referees on my great grandmother's military pension. So he signed it and
amazing.
everything. Yeah, we were talking about him only last week, actually.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
so kind of a Connolly, like 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 Pater O'Donnell, he takes kind of Connolly's kind of analysis and he moves it on. He kind of expands on it in the 1930s. So I mean, I can take kind of Connolly starting it off, Pater O'Donnell's work in the 1930s, their groups then in the 1960s and the 1970s, and by using them, you can start to see this class in motion. But like
Yeah,
Pater O'Donnell's work is probably it's the best since labour in like Irish history. He's one of the few writers who actually gets Conley. He actually gets it because
Yeah.
like he's a Marxist himself. Again, he would never say it because he was trying to win over a very conservative, kind of a rural kind of workforce.
Hmm.
But like but he actually moves it on. He actually takes kind of Conley's kind of analysis and he expands it. He 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 kind of widens it. Conley didn't really see the importance of the graziers, whereas Peter O'Donnell, post 1922, they're in power. He goes, well, this is what Conley he was talking about.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And another interesting thing in terms of sort of the history that me and Audrey have been trying to go through and trying to take this lens of class struggle. And one of the things that I hadn't heard about was this social partnership that was signed in the 80s and how important that was, perhaps in attracting a lot of the companies they were trying to bring over to the IFSC that was set up the same year.
Mm,
But you also included great data about how many strikes there had been in the 80s in the lead up to this social partnership being signed, and then post 2008 when there should have been perhaps more than ever, and there was almost none or
Less.
relatively minuscule amount compared to the 80s. So I'm wondering maybe if, and maybe the social partnership is only one part of a wider sort of elite strategy to remove power from the working classes. But for you, was that kind of maybe the turning point in the fall of kind of union power in Ireland?
I mean, it's a really interesting, it's a really kind of important kind of point. I mean, like the I kind of I would argue that the dominant, not kind of exclusive, but the dominant uh, theoretical or the dominant kind of ideology in the Irish kind of trade union movement has never been socialism. It's never even been kind of colonialism. It's been Catholic social teaching, and it has been since the 1900s. It
Catholic
was
or cattle?
a Catholic social
Catholic.
teaching,
Mhm.
which in Ireland is the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Catholic social teaching and it's Catholic kind of social teaching. So like both works. But like it's like there was a brief moment from 1909 on from 1909
Mm.
until 1922 when a more radical element took control of the trade union movement, and that was Larkin. And Larkin, of course, is a fascinating kind of character, even of himself. But then that's they lose power in the unions from about the 1920s onwards. There are kind of elements, obviously. Um, but
Mm.
you have in the 1930s and the 1940s a very corporatist structure in Ireland. So
Mm.
how I see kind of social partnership is that it's as a way of like seeing how kind of corporatism, which is it's a fascist kind of
So Mussolini essentially described fascism, no? Was
yeah, it
court.
is. Yeah. So it's him. It's like Salazar in the 1930s. Dev was a big fan of Salazar, who was Portugal. And the use and like how you do them is that you bring the kind of trade union movement into it as well, and it's a corporatist system. And Ireland has that kind of system again coming from the church. Like the first full trade union training college, a college for trade unionists. There was one set up in the 1920s. It was a James Connolly one, but it only lasted for about 2 or 3 years. But the main one is set up in about 1946, 1947. It's set up on the South Circular Road. The building is still there, so it isn't being used anymore. And it's set up by the Jesuits, and Jesuits are running this kind of how to be a kind of trade unionist, and they're running kind of that whole school. So the first kind of trade unionist school really in the South is being run not even by the church, but by their shock troops, by the kind of Jesuits themselves. So what I mean, like that's my long-winded way of saying that in the 1980s, you have in Britain and Ireland the same objective in terms of capital, which is to break the power of kind of organized labor and to lower kind of taxation. Britain does it through naked class war, you know, in
Under
terms of
Thatcher.
yeah, under Thatcher, and Ireland does it through gets to the same space, but does it through social partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Where you had kind of trade unions agreeing to tax cuts, which means cut kind of social services in lieu of like tax of kind of wage kind of increases. So it appears that you have more money in your pocket because you're now paying kind of less tax. But that less tax means less money then for, for kind of social services. Basically, it's a Thatcherite, um, it's a Thatcherite kind of strategy, which is brought in here through social partnership, but is brought in Britain through like class war, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that gets into what that corporatist, sorry, what that kind of comprador Catholic corporatist class really means in an Irish kind of context, and that's another book really, but like it just shows for me just the richness of that theory for making sense of how Ireland works, because you really have it's the same outcome as kind of Thatcherism, but it's done with the full agreement. No, I'm being unfair. It was actually the kind of majority of trade unionists were against. Is they're against the social partnership, but ICTU votes for it. You
Mm.
know, so the ATG, like W or like Unite Union, they were always against kind of social partnership. Mandate then as well. But in terms of the movement, there's a movement. All the large public sector unions, they're all on board. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now, say, leading kind of up to today a bit, where, as I mentioned, these eviction numbers, which like are just so shocking
Twenty
considering
thousand, yeah,
the
that's
homeless and housing crisis that already exists and has existed for so long. And, the government, they admit it's a crisis and they've admitted this for over a decade, and yet they still continue to double down on what created the crisis, and people are now kind of, even, I mean, if you look at the recent election turnouts, really starting to lose faith in elections and kind of the whole political system. And even, as you mentioned, the lads failing to give any explanation that makes sense to people anymore as to what's happening in Ireland. And, that naturally kind of opens up space for the likes of the far right to kind of come in and
yeah.
to divert some of this working class energy towards maybe more reactionary places. And that leads to scapegoating and, a lot of the rhetoric you would see today. I'm wondering for you, kind of what are the progressive avenues we should be working towards to actually improve the lives of the working class, and also like do so in a way that leads us towards like a post-capitalist system, whether that's socialism, whether it's something else. But
Hmm.
how, given, say, even the unions now would be not quite the progressive force we would like them to be, what are the kind of areas we should be focusing on for progressive change?
I mean, the God I can do is kind of speak to myself.
Mm,
So what I think it is, it's in raising a class consciousness.
mm,
So how I do that is through like my own kind of methods, which is through writing, through books, through classes. But that's
mm,
what I see it as. I mean, I see that as then part of a wider thing. So of the people who are coming to those kind of classes, there are people who are all activists. So they're all involved in things like CATU or in kind of other movements, or they kind of they're involved in things like this, like the pods. It's
mm,
getting stuff out there that is trying to, kind of counter that whole kind of narrative. So my thing is that how I make sense of it is that, well, what's my role? So what can I do? I'm a shit activist. I'm really terrible at it. Um, so I just stick to kind of what I can do, which is what I think I bring to the table, which is kind of analysis. I've been able to bring that across, but also more than kind of analysis, really move into teaching techniques for research. So
Mm,
I'm starting now to kind of move into running kind of workshops on, well, what are the pots and pans and how do you find stuff out? How do you find out
mm,
about these things? Where this is stuff? How do you navigate the CSO's kind of website? How do you do these things?
yeah.
And so I do think that there's stuff out there. I mean, like there are kind of parties that are doing this stuff. There are people in like Dublin Central, like kind of Kieran Perry and kind of Joe Mooney, who are holding the line against those far right fucks. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
so there are a lot of people who are doing kind of that work. I'm just in awe of them because I just can't do any of that. But what I do is that or I hope to do is to add to that a consciousness raising through
hmm
what I can bring to the table, hopefully, which is those kind of skills about kind of, how to research and then how to kind of get it across. So like, yeah, so I don't have any kind of grand strategy.
Mm.
But
But
this is not just a line, it really does go through my head. I always go back to kind of Samuel Beckett, where you just go on.
mm,
No matter what. I mean, Beckett is the most Irish of like writers, and like he's so Irish, and it gets lost, I think. But like that is the thing that like just when you bury up to your neck and shit, all you can do is sing, you know. So I mean, so yeah, so like that's my solution in terms of my work, is to try and keep on just that kind of research in terms of workshops. And the workshops are part of that as well. I don't do them online for a reason, because again, it's about, you have to be in the room for like 4 weeks. There's some
yeah.
about, so, and I think that like so that's what I see them doing, and I'm really chuffed that that Bohemians kind of co-op are completely on board as well. Like, so
mm.
so they're able to give us kind of that room. It's a nominal fee for it, and yeah,
You got to
so
get down the country too, Connor.
I am actually, yeah, so I'm running with the Sarah Clancy,
I do. Sarah Clancy, yeah, and Claire.
yeah. So we're running a test run, hopefully in June.
Lovely.
It's something that it kind of goes against what I've been saying here, but it's a Friday night, all day Saturday session. So it'll be those four kind of classes. So it'll be very kind of intense, but it's really just to see, will this work? So yeah, so
Mm.
yeah, so yeah, so like,
You can stop being jealous now, Audrey. She's always raging about all the events I get to
I
go
know, I'm like, everything happens in Dublin. Fuck's sake. There's nothing
well, to
down
get
here
it
when you
down.
come out to
So
Dublin.
yeah, so like it'll be hopefully in Ennis. We just have to get, because it looks some of the details can,
Yeah.
they're kind of worked out, and then maybe kind of Galway then as well with kind of Vicky Con Donnelly.
Because
So
there is appetite for it. Because what you're saying, Connor, like about, everyone's role in this, and everyone does have a role. Some people are really good
yeah,
at
yeah,
different kinds of confrontational
exactly.
activism. Some people are good at analysis, but it's all an ecosystem and it all
It feeds
matters.
in. It all
Of
feeds
course it
into the.
does,
It all
because
feeds
like
into it.
the energy, like this turned me into a mad woman. Like, but that's what's needed, because you have to understand your own oppression. You have to
Yeah.
understand to have that reaction. And when you've been living in a culture and a society that is frankly oppressive and gaslights you about, the source of your grievances, there can be an element of people just becoming docile or hopeless, or, like Daragh said, scapegoating.
Mm.
But when we have that clarity and when we learn to kind of ask the right questions and not be duped, there's great energy in that, you know. And I see that beginning to happen. I do see that change happening in people where we're just not buying it anymore. They're just, you know,
Mm.
um, For me personally, I mean, everyone has their moment. Maybe some people are just born Marxists or socialists, but for me, it
No,
was
it's a
Palestine,
long,
and
yeah,
seeing with my like eyes people being slaughtered en masse, and just the callousness and the lying and the barefaced. Yeah, we've nothing got to do with it, and complicity.
yeah.
That for me was just a rupture from anything I'd ever believed to this, and it's been a non-stop journey since to dig and understand. And I think a lot of people are on that journey for different reasons, a lot for Palestine as well. But just things coming to a head at the stage of late stage capitalism. So to have your work ready, it's like that. I think I was saying that to Daragh, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And like the work
Stop.
is there and the ground has been prepared for the likes of me, I feel like, to be able to kind of jump in, you know? So yeah, really, really, really grateful for your work.
Oh, but it's
And
not
yours
Audrey,
too,
my God.
Daragh. Daragh has given me a serious education as well. But it's great because that's the fuel, you
It's
know?
yeah, it's again, it's all kind of different skills. I mean, I've gotten to the age now whereby I finally realized that we should stay in our own lane. And kind of what I
Yeah.
mean by that is that, if you're good at something, do that.
Yeah. I'm
Right?
good at giving out.
Right? That's enough, right? So if you find something, if you're good at that, then just do that, and just get better at it, and then feed that into the wider kind of movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's my thing is that this is what I do. I like the classes help me because it helps me then to do in terms of my research and do more stuff and then seeing where the blind spots are. But the whole thing is I just going back to your point that like it did kind of pop in my head there that really that's my ambition is that you want to get to a stage that whereby when people see class, then it can't be unseen. It's
Yeah.
just, and you just see it. You just see it. It's like Neo in the Matrix. It's all just numbers kind of falling down, and then you finally see it. And then it can't be unseen, and it doesn't matter what they throw at you. It
Mm-hmm.
can't be kind of unseen, and that's enough.
Across
That's
the
me.
threshold.
Yeah,
Get people across the thresholds.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then that's me kind of staying in my lane and hopefully kind of feeding into the wider kind of movement.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And in terms of your work, Sins of the Father, that's available online, most places. Your most recent work, Daragh, is what you've read, but your book Money. Is that the name of it?
Yeah, but and I must actually, I mean, the need to to do a new, 'cause, I mean, even since the Farther, that was kind of 2011.
Mm.
I need to kind of not change it, but to do a kind of updated kind of version.
Yeah, yeah. It's
It's
good to
been
bring
about
us up to the
yeah,
2008, but it's
yeah,
a really, really important section of Irish history that,
definitely, yeah,
to understand that is so it's more than a springboard, like it's transformative.
sure.
Yeah. For me anyway. So I think that's probably a good place to leave it. And thank you so much for your time
Sure,
and
thanks for
for
having me
your
on.
work.
And again, I mean, that's the whole idea, like having these spaces,
Yeah.
and we should give ourselves this is as a movement or as a kind of section of kind of our society. We need to give ourselves these spaces
Yeah,
because no one else will.
definitely. Just create them.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks a
Thanks a
million.
million, Conor.